Welcome to episode 138 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. It's March 18, 1909, and today's story is a reminder that football history did not have to turn out the way it did. Because on this day in 1909, in Paris, a rival to FIFA was founded. It was called the Union Internationale Amateur de Football Association, or the UIAFA, and if that name sounds obscure now, that's exactly the point. Because today, FIFA feels inevitable, the center, the boss, the institution that sits above world football almost by natural law. But in 1909, FIFA was not yet that. It was less than 5 years old. It had already created enemies, and it had already alienated important people, and it had not yet won the argument that there should be one unquestioned global authority in football. So today's pod is about that uncertainty, about the rival body that tried to pull football onto a different track, about the men and federations behind it, about what they wanted, and about what they actually achieved, and about why, in the end, FIFA survived while UIAFA faded away. Because if you want to understand how powerful FIFA eventually became, especially in the age of Avalanche and then Blatter, it helps to remember that in the beginning, even FIFA looked fragile. How did we get here? We start with the obvious but crucial fact. International football was growing faster than its politics could comfortably handle. As more countries and associations began arranging matches, the need for some kind of common authority became increasingly clear. That is why FIFA was founded in Paris in May 1904 by associations from France, Belgium, Denmark, the Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland, and with Germany joining by telegram the same day. It was a practical response to a practical problem. Who recognizes whom? Whose suspensions count? Who has the authority to approve internationals? But the creation of FIFA also created antagonists. The British home nations didn't found it. They already had their own international circuit and didn't see an urgent need to submit to a new continental body. And inside Europe, the biggest early fault lines were not only national, they were ideological and constitutional. Amateur versus professional, empire versus nationality, old prestige versus new bureaucracy. And that matters because the UIAFA was born out of exactly those tensions. In England, the Amateur Football Association had split from the FA during the amateur revolt of the late 1900s. Episode 129, about the last sheriff of London Charity Shield in 1907, talked about this. The FA's acceptance of the professional game and its growing practical authority infuriated hardline amateurs. The AFA wanted recognition. FIFA refused, because FIFA recognized only one association per country. That was not a side issue. It was a constitutional principle. One country, one governing body. That principle would become central to FIFA's later power, but in 1908 and 09, it was still contested. In France, the USFSA, the Union des Sociétés Françaises de Sport Athlétique, reacted badly to FIFA's refusal to admit the AFA. The USFSA was militantly amateur in spirit and had already been losing ground to the Comité Français Interfédéral, the CFI. When FIFA would not bend to the English issue, the USFSA left FIFA in solidarity with the AFA. That meant the French football world itself was split, one body inside FIFA, another outside it, each claiming legitimacy. And then there was Bohemia. The Czech Football Federation had joined FIFA in 1906. But Bohemia was politically inside Austria-Hungary, and the Austrian Federation objected to Bohemia being treated as a separate football nation. In 1908, after protests from Austria, Bohemia was expelled from FIFA. Again, this was not a trivial administrative quarrel. It was an early collision between football identity and political sovereignty. Could football recognize a nation that the state system didn't fully recognize as sovereign? That question would haunt international football again and again. So by early 1909, three discontented forces had found one another: the AFA in England, the USFSA in France, and the Czech Federation in Bohemia. All had reasons to resent FIFA, all had reasons to believe that football governance could be built differently, and all had a reason to think that FIFA's future was not yet secure. Which brings us to the day itself. On March 18, 1909, in Paris, these non-FIFA federations formally established the Union Internationale Amateur de Football Association, sorry for butchering the French there, the UIAFA. The first president was Victor Schneider, a Swiss figure who had previously served as a FIFA vice president. Prince Arthur of Connaught was named honorary president. The symbolism was clear. The UIAFA did not present itself as a protest club. It presented itself as a proper international authority. And the purpose was just as clear. The UIAFA wanted to organize international football on explicitly amateur lines and without giving FIFA a monopoly on recognition. It was, in effect, a rival constitutional model for the sport, more open to the amateur cause, more tolerant of federations and football identities that FIFA had excluded, less willing to accept that one central body should decide everything. The body's very name tells you its politics. Amateurism was not just a playing principle, it was a governing philosophy. And for a brief moment, this looked serious. The UIAFA did not remain just an Anglo-French-Czech protests. Spain's Fédération Española de Clubs de Football joined in October 2009. A Belgian rebel federation joined in 1910, a Swiss body in 1911. Polish football circles, driven in part by Wisła Krakow's initiative, sought entry too. FIFA, for its part, took the threat seriously enough to react. The 1909 FIFA Congress in Budapest, matches between clubs from FIFA member associations and UIAFA clubs were prohibited. That is an important detail because it shows that this was not a phantom rival. FIFA saw enough danger in it to draw a line. Football governance was not yet settled. It was being fought over in real time. And the UIAFA did achieve something tangible. In 1911, during the International Exposition in Roubaix, it organized what was called the Grand Tournoi E0138 de Football, often loosely described later as a kind of European championship, though that title is probably grander than the event really was. Bohemia won it. That matters. However short-lived the UIAFA was, it did not merely exist on paper. It staged a significant international tournament of its own and demonstrated that football could, at least briefly, imagine a path outside FIFA. So what did the UIAFA really change? Well, it exposed FIFA's early weakness. We talk about FIFA now as though central authority was always a natural destination. It wasn't. In the first decade, FIFA was still fighting for legitimacy, still negotiating with the British, still trying to define what counted as a nation, and still vulnerable to institutional schism. The UIAFA's very existence proves that. Moreover, it helps sharpen FIFA's constitutional instincts. The conflict with the AFA, the US FSA, and Bohemia reinforced the importance of the one country, one association principle. It also taught FIFA that control over recognition was the heart of power. Once you decide who is legitimate, you shape the entire map of the game. UIAFA did not defeat FIFA, but it did help clarify what FIFA needed to become in order to survive. And finally, it showed the limits of a rival model. The UIAFA had energy, grievance, and some prestige names, but it lacked durability. Its base was fragmented. Some of its members were themselves rebel bodies rather than stable national authorities. Its amateur emphasis may have felt morally serious to its founders, but football was moving towards broader, messier mass growth, not back toward exclusivist amateur control. As one modern history of early football governance puts it, the UIAFA looked like the dying embers of the sporting bourgeoisie rather than the architecture of the future. That feels harsh, but history suggests it's basically right. By 1912 and early 13, the UIAFA was fading into inactivity. The US FSA re-entered the French mainstream and aligned with the CFI. The Spanish football authorities moved toward reunification. The English amateur split gradually lost its international edge before ending at home. And once those feuds began to close, the UIAFA lost the oxygen of conflict that had created it in the first place. It had built by exclusion and protest, and once the exclusion softened, the protest coalition thinned out. And then came the Great War. World War I did not merely interrupt football, it fractured the international system around it. FIFA nearly collapsed after the death of Daniel Bury Woolfall in 1918, surviving largely because Karl Hirschmann kept it alive almost by force of will. That matters for this story because it reminds us that even after UIAFA disappeared, FIFA still wasn't guaranteed to become what it later became. The organization that would one day dominate world football was still, in the late 1910s, something fragile enough to fail. That's where the long arc returns us to episode 121. In 1921, Jules Rimet became FIFA president, and that changed the trajectory. Rimet stabilized FIFA, expanded it, and gave it a world historical mission through the World Cup. The body that had once been challenged by the UIAFA, shaken by British indifference, and nearly broken by war, now found a leader capable of turning survival into expansion. That does not make the UIAFA relevant. It makes UIAFA look like one of the tests FIFA had to survive before it could become FIFA in the modern sense. And maybe that is the best way to understand March 18, 1909. Not as a footnote, not as a failed sideshow, not just as an odd acronym in football's attic, but as evidence that football's international order was once genuinely open, that another route was imaginable, that FIFA had rivals before it had certainty, and that the shape of world football was not inevitable. It had to be fought for, defended, improvised, and eventually institutionalized. So before we go, 3 things to take away from March 18, 1909. First, FIFA's later dominance can make its early fragility hard to see. UIAFA is one of the clearest reminders that the top of football governance was once up for grabs. And second, the UIAFA was born from 3 early football tensions that never fully disappear from the sport: amateurism versus professionalism, political borders versus football identities, and central authority versus local autonomy. Third, UIAFA lost, but not without leaving a mark. Its short life helped define what FIFA needed to defend, and its 1911 Roubaix tournament proved that even rival visions of international football could produce real institutions, real matches, and real consequences. On this day in 1909, in Paris, the Union Internationale Amateur de Football Association was founded as a rival to FIFA, a short-lived but revealing challenge that showed world football's governing future was not yet settled, and that the road to FIFA's later supremacy was far less inevitable than it now appears. That's all for episode 138 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show, leave a 5-star rating, and share it with a fellow football historian. Tomorrow, we go to March 19, 1986, and to one of UEFA's wildest reversals, Uerdingen's impossible comeback, a scoreline swing so violent it still feels fictional. See you tomorrow.